Hello and welcome to the program. At the end of March, Russian security forces conducted the most large-scale searches of Crimean Tatar homes in the 5 years of the peninsula's occupation. 24 people were detained and transported to Russia on made-up charges of terrorism. The Kremlin-controlled court of Simferopol detained these individuals until May the 15th. Now, to discuss this, we're joined in the studio today by Guryeva. She's a spokesperson of Amnesty International Ukraine. Hello and thank you for joining us. So, first, Human Rights Watch NGO called the arrest which took place on the Annex Peninsula on March 27 and 28 an increase in pressure on the local population. And the activists also believe that the goal of these large-scale arrests is to politically silence activists. Do you agree with that statement?
We would absolutely agree. We see the worsening of situation in Crimea since the moment of annexation. So from year to year, the situation is getting worse and worse. The larger scales of arrests happen. The more people feel pressure, more people feel threatened by de facto authorities. So indeed, those recent arrests were one of the most violent ones in terms of number of people that were arrested and in terms of effect it had on the whole community. So what we can see is that Crimean Tatars are very united. They really support each other. They create organizations they share information between each other. They film the searches and the arrests just to let some information get out from Crimea to the rest of Ukraine, to other countries, to inform other countries about what's going on in Crimea. So this activism of Crimean Tatars, their position, it's obviously might be a reason why they're targeted so heavily by de facto authorities and why de facto authorities want to silence them.
But would you say that this activism, as you said, this presence on social media can also help them to make their voice heard? Well, I mean, it hurts them in a way that they're become target, but at the same time, it cannot help.
It definitely makes them a target, but on the other hand, hardly any international organization is allowed to Crimea to monitor the human rights situation. So it's sort of a black spot. We don't if Crimean Tatars wouldn't share this information, we wouldn't know what's happening there. And these facts of these human rights violations, they should be known because in future they can be used in international courts. So it is crucial that this information gets widespread. It's also very important that Crimean Tatars help and support each other. That's something that allows them to, to stay there, you know,
to exist as a community.
Yes, to resist to this pressure that they face.
Now, about you talked about lawyers and the idea that maybe it could help for them to make a case in front of courts. Now, as of today, what kind of legal assistance can be put in place to help them? Is it possible?
There are lawyers. Obviously, they have lawyers. The problem is that these lawyers are quite often not allowed to them. For example, when the arrests were happening, in most cases, lawyers weren't allowed to be present during the arrest, which should have been happen. So we will see all previous cases that we were watching, and for example, case of Emir Hussein Kuku and other Hizb ut-Tahrir cases, and in general other cases in Russia against Crimean Tatars, they show that the trials that happen, they mostly, it's a sham trials, they mostly don't have evidence, that they have nothing to prove that these people that are arrested are guilty in any sort of real crime. So there's a high risk that this will be just the same situation and that people will get real sentences for crimes that they never did.
Now, how can and is it possible that the Ukrainian government or some other international authorities can interfere on that matter? Is it possible? Are there any leverage, or it's complicated?
It is complicated. What is important is to keep international pressure, to keep this issue discussed on the highest level possible. For example, our organization made a report on UNESCO in Paris only a couple of days ago, where we stressed the difficult situation with human rights in Crimea. We again flagged out all these main human rights violations that happened there. And this is one of the examples. There are also many events going on all around the world telling people, telling governments about the situation in Crimea. So all this should put pressure on Russia, on de facto authorities, and hopefully in future it can influence the situation. But obviously it is difficult to almost impossible to influence the situation in this particular moment. However, as I said, that Crimean Tatars do support each other, do support families of those arrested. And there's another important point that we also should support Crimean Tatars, no matter in which country we live. We should support them, we should support their families, and we should support their peaceful struggle. And it might help them to live in the situation where they are now. And unfortunately, it will change in some years.
Now, I wouldn't say they are forgotten, but like when Western countries hear about the situation of political prisoners in Ukraine, they hear about Sentsov, they hear about Sushenko, all these other political prisoners, even the Ukrainian sailors. How to ensure that the Crimean, you talked about a few campaigns, but what are the next initiatives to ensure that the Crimean Tatars detained by Russian, de facto Russian authorities in Crimea are not forgotten in Western countries?
It is also difficult because obviously there is certain people and authorities might feel tired of this topic, and there are many other issues rising. But still, these events that happen, in the discussion that happens, it's in media coverage. It does help to raise this issue, and the presence of media on the courts would be very helpful, would be very important. The presence of representatives of embassies would be very important if they came to court hearings and if they wrote in their Twitter accounts and Facebook and made some press release about that. So all this would keep that light on these cases, and yeah, that would be helpful.
So recently on the 31st of March, the first round of the election happened. Next round will be, the second round will be on the 21st of April. How do you see the outcome of this election on the fate of Crimean Tatar? Do you see it continuing like that? Do you see it as a change? And can Amnesty International appeal to the next president, whoever it is, to put more pressure?
Whoever will become a president will have to face the reality of annexed Crimea and arrests made by de facto authorities and Russian authorities. So definitely we will be making appeals to new government, to new president, and we will attract attention to this issue. Unfortunately, at this moment, what we see in the general rhetorics, that politicians do not place this issue on the first place. Mainly they pay their attention to some social things like prices for oil and payments to people, right? So issues like human rights are not on the top, but we are aiming to change it. So we will definitely work on attracting their attention to these issues.
Now, how does Amnesty International and maybe other NGOs aim to appeal? Are there initiatives like writing letters to them, like flash mobs and things like that?
No, it's absolutely constant work. That's just main thing we do. We do advocacy, we do media work, we do different projects. We have many activists all over Ukraine, not to say about all over the world, that make their events, educational, media events, some actions on the streets. So that's all complex of actions we are doing and we will be doing.
And now, to conclude this interview, someone who's not necessarily part of an NGO and something like that, how can anyone help in that matter? These NGOs and human rights watch NGOs on that matter.
There are different ways to help. On the one hand, as I said, by spreading information, writing letters, signing petitions, supporting Crimean Tatars and families of those detained. There are also many organizations, so-called grassroots organizations, organized by Crimean Tatars themselves. So one may check whether they accept donations and consider this option, or whether they need any other help from wherever you are, and that would what you can do.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio to talk about this issue. That was Guryeva, spokesperson of Amnesty International Ukraine. Thank you for watching the program and stay tuned for the rest.